Hey, what's up, Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Way of Wade 8085. Thanks to Way of Wade for sending me a pair of these to check out. However, this video is by no means sponsored. All opinions on these, good, bad, and indifferent, are all my own. Now, the 8085 to me is pretty incremental change from the 8084 line. There are some things I think are really interesting about these, especially in the midsole. Some fit characteristics you gotta know about before you try them, but yeah, some pretty cool stuff hiding underneath. Let's get into them. Now, the first thing in the uppers I want to make mention of, and this is just something that does not cost a lot of money to do for manufacturers, and it is really nice when it actually happens, and that's when you do get lace loops through the tongue all the way through it. So each lace line gets a loop, right? So the tongue stays really nice and steady in the shoe, but then it also has a gusset into the strobe board. So the lockdown on these are really good, especially for a drop-in shoe with how high the stack of foam is on this. Heel slippage was mild. Right? I mean, I barely was moving in these things, and for the fit, the way these things do fit, that was an absolute miracle. It doesn't take that much to do it, right? It doesn't cost that much money to throw a thread through the tongue, but so little people actually do it in combination with a gusset, but it does make a difference. Now, that being said, going into the rear foot too, you actually do get a lot of bulky padding around the heel counter and ankle collars. That's also that big beading of pad does keep you in the shoe as well too, with, like I said, how high the stack is and how relatively little room there actually is between your heel and the outside of the shoe in terms of going from inferior to superior or from bottom to top. And then as you go through the lace line, these are kind of like quasi outrigger lace eyelets. They are reinforced though, so you know, they should be durable enough. And then going into the rest of the upper, you do get almost like a felted, it almost looks like suede, but like kind of like a felt on the medial and lateral side for reinforcement. And you just do get meshing that goes all the way throughout the shoe on the upper layer. Then another layer of pretty open pored mesh underneath that. Then the tongue itself is, I mean, the padding is moderate, but it goes all the way throughout the tongue, going all the way down in that central spine. So lace irritation is really none. Now, if you look at these things on the heat mapping, they do heat up 110.8 degrees, which, you know, you look at the images of them and you would think they wouldn't heat up at all with how much of the upper is lighting up and how much egress there is, except for the fact you have an exposed drop-in midsole. And typically when you've got exposed drop-in midsoles, especially with thermoplastics, they just want to heat up a ton. If you look at the difference between the picture of the drop-in on this heat map versus other heat maps where you have a little bit more of an engineered insole that just allows heat to dissipate more, you kind of see where all that heating comes from. So really, it is just the drop-in. In terms of the breathability mapping of them, you can see fog getting out of everywhere. So the rest of the shoe is doing a very nice job at pushing out moisture and heat. It's just that, like I said, anytime you're on an exposed drop-in midsole, get ready for there to be a little bit more heat buildup between the direct contact of your foot and that drop-in midsole. And no, you can't put anything over top of it unless, like I said, it is actually glued onto it, right? It's adhered to it, or otherwise you'll have two layers underneath of you that are moving independently, so you don't want to do that. Now look at these things on the upper durability test though, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. This little like waxy guard here, the burr gets right through. However, the burr really does not get through at all the mesh layer, and this is a pretty light meshing layer and it's still doing pretty good against it. So put it this way, if you're dragging and sliding a lot on gritty outdoor courts, you're gonna mess up this waxy layer and you'll probably start to catch this upper. So if you are a big dragger or slider, I'd say indoor courts is where you're gonna go. If you're not though, that might be a different story, which we'll get to in the outsole section. But speaking of, you know, the rugged capabilities of this shoe, look at the heel counter. Number one, you get an internal heel counter, which it's pretty standard, but then you get a top kind of rubberized external heel counter, but then you also get the heel counter that comes all the way around the frame of the shoe, which we'll talk about in the midsole section. So you're almost getting like 3 heel counters. I know the top external one and the superior external one is rubberized, but it is still something going across it. So the heel counter of this shoe, I think is really kind of over-engineered, which is pretty nice to see. All right, but getting into the midsole teardown, you have an absolutely enormous slab of Super Boom foam, and this stuff is legit. If you look at it, it looks more like ZoomX foam than previous Boom foams do. Like Boom foam to me kind of looked like a mixture between ZoomX and Ultra Boost. This one looks a lot more like ZoomX. Thing is it's sculpted in a way in the midfoot where you really do feel like there is a trampoline just pushing up underneath of your arch. It's a really cool feeling. And then underneath of that, you do get a strobe board made of foam, and then you do get a carbon fiber shank underneath of that. Basically just spans the entire midfoot. The thing is you also get an external shank, like I said, that goes around the heel counter through the midfoot of the shoe, right? And that goes around the forefoot, comes back around to the lateral side of the shoe. So it is connected throughout the entirety of the shoe, which I think is what gives this shoe, I mean, even more than the carbon fiber plate, is what gives the shoe most of its stability. Now the thing is you need all of that because the drop-in is so high off the ground and because the shoe is so low profile. We'll get into that when we get into the fit section and in the version of this shoe. Now on the bounce height test, got 46 centimeters in the rear foot, 47 in the forefoot. So this Super Boom is no joke. And I noticed with these on foot, the subjective or on foot feelings of bounce really match what I saw on the bounce height test. These things just feel super springy, super bouncy, especially under the arch. Now, is that gonna go away over time? When it compresses, maybe, but while this foam is new and resilient, it is probably the bounciest feeling foam I've had yet to date, and it's on a drop-in, which usually drop-ins, you don't really feel super bouncy in because things are moving independently. In these ones, like some of the other 808, especially the 808 3 Ultra V2, they just have, like I said, a superior feeling of bounce. And yeah, the shanks are doing a lot, but it's just that direct feeling underfoot with that Super Boom foam that is just wild. All right, but getting into the outsole tread, this is pretty typical for the 808 line, really shallow tread depth. This one is basically all just herringbone. Now they say it's a combination of their ground control unit, which is their polyurethane outsole tread, as well as the Tough RB, which is their kind of extra durable rubber. The durometer on these comes in at a 19, and we've seen with some leaning foams, like that durometer is actually going down while the durability is going up, whereas in this one, the durability is actually up. So I thought that was pretty interesting to see. On the grip test ramp, they don't slip till 38 degrees, which I guess is upper level of normal. And then remember, that's static grip, but looking at dynamic grip on these things, really same thing, really just a minute amount of give when you're putting a lot of force through them. I did notice after a while, I mean, they do pick up dust. Dust pickup's about mild to moderate. And you do get a little bit more forgiveness. They are easy enough to wipe down though, because it is so shallow. Right? So, the rear foot of the shoe moves more than the forefoot of the shoe, I will say. So I think as long as you keep them clean, they're gonna do pretty well for you. Now look at these things on the speed ratio, they come in at a 3.37, a shank score of 0.4, because there's two shanks, the one goes across the entire foot. That bumps it up to a 3.77. And honestly, if it weren't for the fit of these things, for some people, I think that they would be exactly that. They are ridiculously fast shoes, not only from side to side, but also going north to south, especially, like I said, because of the feelings of bounce and kind of the feelings of confidence, especially going north to south, but also you got two shanks also working for you. On the outsole durability test on these things, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, yeah, not even millimeter damage, basically just scuffs up the micro gridding. This tread does have a micro grid on it, or a micro texture, I should say. And so yeah, even though the tread is pretty shallow, I still think they're okay for outdoor courts. You might heat up a ton on them. That's the one thing I wouldn't like on outdoor courts is the exposed drop-in. The thing is, it's protective enough against those courts. So if you don't mind bringing a separate pair of socks and some foot powder, I think they do okay on outdoor courts. I still think their best use case is on indoor hardwood, indoor clean hardwood, I should say. And then I'd say vinyl and then outdoor courts. But I still think if you want to take them outdoors, I think it's one of the few shoes with a super shallow tread that you can. All right, but getting into the one thing about the 808.5 that you're actually gonna have to watch out for, and that is the fit. Number one, they come in at a 12-degree inflare, which it's getting up there, it's not terrible. But then they do have a resting everted position of 1 degree everted. But then that goes to 5 degrees everted. I really think that's because of the high stack of foam. Yes, the shell of the shoe is pretty stable. It's just that you're sitting up so high, so there's just a lot of room to push into the shoe, right? When you're everting, especially when the inside of your foot's coming down and the outside's coming up, there's just, you don't have a shank integrated to it. So there's just more room, right? And that's why, like I said, you kind of need that shell and the two shanks to make this shoe kind of what it is and such a good performer. It kind of needs all that to be able to handle that stack of foam, which is still pretty light. But I think the bigger thing versus the 4 degrees of eversion, which is just, a little bit more on the higher limit. It's not bad, but it is on the higher limit. But the bigger thing is how long this shoe is. It comes in at 28.9 centimeters of usable space. And remember, with drop-ins, you sacrifice some space, right? Because of the rails of the shoe. So that's not even how long the actual shoe is. I noticed with these, I really did notice how long these are. Now they come in at only 8.6 centimeters of metatarsal width, 9.7 of toe box width, and the toe box taper of 28 degrees, so pretty standard. The thing is my foot is a little bit artificially short because I inflare a little bit, and so my big toe like doesn't find the tip of the shoe as well as maybe some of my lesser toes do, if that makes any sense. And so I really feel the length when a shoe is a little bit longer. These are pretty narrow. So I'd say narrow feet, I would probably go down a half size on these things. You might actually have you might get a pretty locked down fit on that. If you're a narrow foot, a little bit longer toed, I just go true to size. Or if you don't mind a little bit of that length, can wear 2 pairs of socks, I think then you're okay. A medium and a 2E, it's gonna be tough because the shoe is just gonna fit a little bit longer for you, plus you've got the width. So if anything, just go true to size. You're probably, a medium you can go true to size. 2E, you might have a little bit of cramping issues on that. Like I said, the shoe is pretty big, so it might be okay, but a 4E, I think it's a mismatch. Like I said, these are more just of a narrow fitting shoe. Good for some people, maybe not for some others. In terms of people I'd be recommending these for, I think people that want easy speed and easy bounce in a drop-in shoe. Remember, you can't put orthotics in these things. And I think because of how much movement that drop-in is gonna allow, people with strain and sprain things, I think at first it's gonna feel really good, but you're really gonna notice once the foam starts breaking down. So I think if you can keep them new, right? I mean, I know that's kind of a misnomer, right? You're getting them to play in them. But I think while they're new, they're really good for a lot of different things, especially like shin splints, things like that, because it just gives so much back. And they're not super heavy. So your tibialis anterior, right, is not having to do a lot of work. So those anterior tibial stress syndromes, shin splints, things like that aren't gonna be too bad. It's just that once the shoe starts breaking down, I think you're really gonna notice when it starts breaking down. But I think for a lighter player that's not gonna do a ton of damage to that drop-in, you are gonna get an incredibly lively shoe for a drop-in, especially if you are more of a narrow-footed person. So I'm really hoping, though, that this is what we start seeing in more wave weight shoes with Super Boom incorporated into, every model, or at least, parts of it into more models coming down the road, because the way they're starting to tune the boom foams is just out of this world. You really got to try it you just got to experience it, right, to just know what I'm talking about. It really is different even from their original boom foam. It is fantastic. So I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below, especially if you're coming from the 808-3 and the 808-4, kind of what your thoughts are going into the 5s, if they've sparked your fancy or not. Let me know in the comments down below. If you want to see the other brand new wave weight shoe just came out, the Wave Weight Ice Blood 2v2, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse. Oh man, I talk so much in these videos.